was untouchable, a global superstar, a hero who embodied strength, resilience, and glory. Fans chanted his name, children idolized him, and the world seemed to bow at his feet. But behind the flashing lights and roaring applause, behind the muscles and bravado, a sinister storm brewed. A storm that no one saw coming, not even those closest to him. This is the story of Ryan Steele, the Titan. A man who rose to unimaginable heights, only to fall into the darkest depths of despair. And when the storm finally broke, it left a trail of devastation so horrifying that it shocked even the most hardened hearts. How does a man adored by millions, a father, a husband, and a hero, spiral into a nightmare of his own making? Was it the crushing weight of fame, the relentless physical and emotional toll of his career, or was it the ghosts of a past he tried so desperately to bury? This is more than a story of tragedy. It's a tale of addiction, unhealed trauma, and the devastating consequences of silence. What happens when the very things that make you a legend become the chains that drag you to your doom? Before we dive into this harrowing tale of glory and ruin, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. We uncover the stories that haunt us, the ones that make us question the human condition, and trust me, this is a story you won't want to miss. Imagine the roar of the crowd, the blinding arena lights, the ring vibrating under the weight of a man who seemed larger than life. Ryan Steele wasn't just a wrestler, he was a phenomenon. Every time he stepped into the ring, fans erupted in chants of "Titan, Titan." His signature moves were the stuff of legend, replayed millions of times on screens across the globe. Kids wore his merchandise and adults marveled at his discipline and charisma. But what they didn't see, the part the cameras never showed, was the man behind the Titan. The man who, after the match ended and the arena emptied, sat alone in a hotel room staring at the bottom of a bottle. The man whose body was breaking under the strain of years of abuse, both self-inflicted and systemic. The man who carried the weight of a past so dark, it threatened to consume him. This is not just a cautionary tale, it's a story that forces us to confront the shadows we all carry. And as we unravel Ryan Steele's story, you'll find yourself questioning everything you thought you knew about fame, family, and the human spirit. Ryan Steele's story began in the unlikeliest of places. A rundown small-town San Angelo, Texas, with cracked sidewalks, rusted street signs, and a suffocating air of hopelessness. He was the youngest of 3 siblings, raised in a house where love was a rarity and fear was a constant companion. His father, a failed athlete, was a bitter and abusive man who saw Ryan as a punching bag for his frustrations. As a boy, Ryan found solace in the unlikeliest of places, a dusty VHS tape of a professional wrestling match. Watching the larger-than-life heroes throw punches and take victory laps in the ring, Ryan saw something he'd never seen in his own life: power, control, and triumph. Wrestling wasn't just entertainment for him, it was a lifeline. A glimpse into a world where strength and determination could conquer all. By the time he was a teenager, Ryan had transformed his backyard into a makeshift wrestling ring. He trained relentlessly, pushing his body to its limits. Every punch he threw wasn't just practice, it was a blow against his father's shadow, a step closer to escaping the life he loathed. When he finally broke into the wrestling scene, his raw talent and undeniable charisma made him a standout. He wasn't just another wrestler, he was the Titan. His towering frame, chiseled physique, and electrifying presence drew fans like moths to a flame. With every victory, Ryan felt himself rising further from his painful past, proving to the world and to himself that he was unstoppable. Ryan's life off the mat seemed like the perfect complement to his professional success. He married Emily, a sharp and compassionate journalist who had a knack for seeing through the facade of his public persona. Emily wasn't dazzled by the Titan. She loved Ryan, the man behind the mask, the boy who had fought tooth and nail to overcome his demons. Their son Mason was the light of Ryan's life. With his curly hair and infectious laugh, Mason was a miniature version of his father, often mimicking Ryan's signature wrestling moves in their living room. Fans adored the father-son duo, especially when Mason appeared at matches proudly wearing his tiny Titan t-shirt and cheering louder than anyone else in the crowd. To the world, they were the picture-perfect family, a loving wife, a devoted father, and a bright-aimed son. Their smiles lit up magazine covers, their family outings trended on social media, and their bond seemed unbreakable. But as with any spotlight, the brighter it shone, the darker the shadows it cast. But beneath the adoration was an unrelenting pressure. Injuries began to pile up, bruised ribs, torn ligaments, and concussions that left him dazed for days. The industry demanded more matches, more stunts, more of the superhuman feats that had made him a star. Sponsors and fans had high expectations, and Ryan felt the weight of them all. Behind the scenes, his body was breaking down, but he couldn't show weakness. Not to his fans, not to his family, not to himself. The Titan had to be invincible, no matter the cost. Imagine the roar of the crowd as Ryan Steele stepped into the ring, his muscles glistening under the harsh lights, his theme music echoing through the arena. The fans were deafening, chanting his name like a war cry, "Titan! Titan!" He raised his arms, soaking in the energy, the adoration, the love. But what they didn't see, what no one saw, was the pain hidden behind his triumphant smile. They didn't see the ice packs he strapped to his knees after every match, the pills he swallowed to dull the pain, or the nights he spent staring at the ceiling, haunted by the man he used to be. They didn't see the cracks forming in the foundation of his perfect life. How long can a hero carry the weight of the world before it crushes him? How long can a man run from his demons before they catch up? Ryan Steele's rise to glory was breathtaking, but his fall would leave the world speechless. Ryan Steele's life was a spectacle of grandeur under the glaring lights, but behind closed doors it was a house of cards teetering on collapse. Years of relentless wrestling matches, grueling training sessions, and the toll of his signature high-impact moves had left his body a battlefield of chronic pain. The once invincible Titan was now a man struggling to stand upright in the morning without wincing, At first it was just a few painkillers to take the edge off, but as the injuries piled up and the demands on his body grew, so did his reliance on the pills. Soon painkillers turned into cocktails of opioids and performance-enhancing drugs. The substances dulled the pain and gave him the energy to keep going, but they also began to erode the very foundation of who he was. Emily, his wife, wasn't blind to the changes. She noticed the way Ryan's once vibrant eyes now seemed clouded and distant. His mood swings were becoming more frequent, moments of tenderness replaced by bouts of unprovoked anger. He would snap at the smallest inconveniences, only to apologize profusely moments later. "Ryan, you're not yourself," Emily said one night, her voice trembling with concern. She reached out to touch his arm, but he pulled away, retreating into the shadows of their bedroom. "I'm fine, Emily, I'm just tired," he muttered, his voice hollow. But the truth was far darker. Ryan wasn't just tired, he was unraveling. Rather than confront his demons, Ryan buried himself deeper into his work. He trained harder, pushed his body further, and ignored the warning signs screaming at him to stop. He convinced himself that as long as he could perform in the ring, everything else would fall into place. The weight of being the Titan was more than Ryan had ever anticipated. To the world he was a hero, a symbol of strength and resilience. But to himself he was a man barely holding it together. The constant need to live up to his persona began to fracture his sense of self. Fans demanded perfection. Sponsors expected results. The Wrestling Federation pressured him to maintain his peak performance. There was no room for weakness, no space for vulnerability. Ryan felt like he was living in a cage, a gilded one, perhaps, but a cage nonetheless. And then the flashbacks began. Late at night, when the house was quiet and his family was asleep, Ryan would lie awake, haunted by memories of his abusive childhood. His father's voice echoed in his mind, spewing venomous words that made him feel small, weak, unworthy. "You'll never be good enough," the voice hissed. Ryan clenched his fists, trying to block it out, but the memories were relentless. The past he had worked so hard to escape was clawing its way back into his present, triggering paranoia and uncontrollable anger. He began to lash out at those closest to him, including Emily and even his young son Mason. The breaking point came during a high-profile match that was supposed to be a career highlight. The arena was packed, the energy electric, and millions were watching live on television. But Ryan was far from his best. The painkillers and steroids coursing through his veins dulled his senses and clouded his judgment. Halfway through the match, his opponent executed a routine move that Ryan failed to counter. He landed hard on the mat, the impact jarring his already fragile body. The crowd gasped, but Ryan's reaction wasn't one of resilience. It was rage. The fallout was immediate. Sponsors began pulling their endorsements, citing his erratic behavior as a liability. The Wrestling Federation, under immense public pressure, suspended him indefinitely. Headlines screamed about the Titan's fall, and social media erupted with debates about whether Ryan was a victim of the industry or his own worst enemy. At home, Emily confronted him, her voice shaking with a mix of anger and desperation. "Ryan, this has to stop. You're destroying yourself. And us." But Ryan couldn't hear her. He was too consumed by his own spiral, too lost in the storm of his own making. How does a man loved by millions lose everything he holds dear? How does a hero become a cautionary tale? The cracks in Ryan Steele's life were no longer beneath the surface. They were shattering everything he had built. The suspension from wrestling should have been an opportunity for Ryan Steele to heal and reconnect with his family. Instead, it became the crucible that exposed every crack in their once perfect life. Ryan's presence at home, once a source of joy for Emily and Mason, quickly became a source of tension. The man who had once lit up their home with laughter and love was now a shadow of himself. His temper was a ticking time bomb, set off by the smallest inconveniences. A misplaced toy, a question he didn't want to answer, or even the sound of the television. Emily, who had always been the steady force in their lives, found herself walking on eggshells. She learned to anticipate his moods, carefully choosing her words to avoid triggering his anger. But no matter how hard she tried, it was never enough. Mason, their bright and spirited son, was too young to understand the full scope of what was happening, but he felt the shift. The house that had once been filled with warmth now felt cold and heavy. In his innocent way, Mason tried to mend the growing divide. He would draw pictures of the three of them holding hands, leave them on the kitchen counter and say, "Look, we're still a team, right?" Emily's heart broke every time she saw those pictures. She wanted to believe in the family Mason saw in his drawings, but the reality was far different. Ryan's unpredictable behavior made every day feel like a minefield, and the weight of trying to shield Mason from the chaos was wearing her down. Desperate for clarity, Emily began confiding in her closest friends. Over coffee and tearful conversations, she revealed the depth of her fears. "I don't even recognize him anymore," she admitted one day, her voice trembling. "He's angry all the time, and Mason, he's starting to notice. I don't know how much longer I can do this." Her friends urged her to think about her and Mason's safety, to consider leaving before things got worse, but the decision wasn't that simple. Emily couldn't ignore the love she once had for Ryan, nor could she forget the man he used to be, the man who had swept her off her feet with his charm and determination. And then there was Mason. Emily worried about how a separation would affect him. Would he blame her? Would he resent Ryan? She was caught in a web of love, fear, and responsibility, unsure which path would lead to the least amount of pain. Still, the idea of leaving began to take root. Emily started researching options, contacting lawyers, looking into temporary housing, and quietly setting aside money. She didn't want to leave Ryan in his fragile state, but she also couldn't ignore the toll his behavior was taking on their family. It happened on a cold, rainy evening, a night that would forever change their lives. The tension in the house was palpable as Emily prepared dinner, her movements quick and deliberate. Ryan sat in the living room staring blankly at the television, a bottle of whiskey resting on the coffee table beside him. Dinner was a quiet affair, the clinking of silverware the only sound. Mason, sensing the unease, kept his head down, eating in silence. After Mason went to bed, Emily decided it was time to confront the storm that had been brewing for months. "We need to talk," she said, her voice firm but measured. Ryan looked up at her, his eyes bloodshot and weary. About what? He muttered, taking another swig from the bottle. About us. About this mess we're living in, Emily replied, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to stay composed. The conversation quickly escalated. Emily told Ryan she wanted a separation, that she couldn't keep living like this. Her words hit him like a freight train. A separation? Ryan repeated, his voice rising. You're giving up on me? On us? I'm not giving up, Ryan. I'm trying to save what's left before there's nothing to save, Emily said, tears streaming down her face. But Ryan wasn't listening. The pain, the rejection, the fear, it all boiled over in a fit of rage. He slammed his fist on the table, the sound echoing through the house. You think you can just walk away? After everything I've done for this family? For you? He shouted, his voice shaking with anger. Emily stood her ground, though her heart was pounding in her chest. Ryan, this isn't about blame. It's about survival. Our survival. But Ryan was too far gone, consumed by his emotions. The man who had once been her rock, her partner, was now a storm she couldn't weather. In that moment, the fragile threads holding their family together snapped. The home they had built, the love they had shared, was now a battlefield, and the casualties would be devastating. It was a stormy night, the kind where thunder seemed to shake the very walls of their suburban home. Rain lashed against the windows as if nature itself was trying to warn of the tragedy about to unfold. Ryan Steele, once a global icon and a hero to millions, sat slumped on the couch, a dangerous cocktail of drugs and alcohol coursing through his veins. The house was eerily quiet, the only sounds the ticking of a clock and the occasional rumble of thunder. But in Ryan's haze, the silence was deafening, a sinister void filled with imagined whispers and conspiracies. His thoughts raced uncontrollably. They're planning to leave me. They don't love me anymore. They want to destroy me. Emily was upstairs in their bedroom, scrolling through her phone, trying to find a moment of peace after another tense day. Mason, their bright-omed son, was asleep in his room, clutching his favorite stuffed animal. Neither of them could have imagined the storm brewing downstairs, one far more dangerous than the one outside. Fueled by paranoia, Ryan convinced himself that his family was plotting against him. The love they once shared now felt like betrayal in his twisted mind. He staggered up the stairs, his footsteps heavy and deliberate, his breathing ragged. Emily looked up as he entered the room, her face immediately registering concern. "Ryan, what's wrong?" she asked, her voice calm but wary. But Ryan didn't answer. His eyes were wild, his movements erratic. He began shouting incoherent accusations, his voice a mix of anger and desperation. Emily tried to reason with him, to calm him down, but her words only seemed to fuel his rage. "Don't lie to me," he bellowed. "I know what you're planning. You want to take Mason and leave me." "Second, Ryan." "Ryan, stop. Listen to yourself. No one is leaving you," Emily pleaded, her voice trembling. But Ryan was beyond reason. In a moment of uncontrollable fury, he grabbed a heavy object, a trophy from his wrestling days that sat on the nightstand. Emily barely had time to react before he struck her. The sound of the impact was sickening, a horrifying crack that echoed through the house. Mason, startled awake by the commotion, ran to his parents' room, his small frame trembling with fear. "Mom? Dad? What's happening?" he asked, his voice quivering. Seeing his son, Ryan froze for a moment, as if the sight of Mason might pull him back from the edge. But the paranoia and rage had consumed him entirely. In his warped mind, Mason was no longer his son, he was part of the betrayal. What happened next was unspeakable. The man who had once been a loving father, who had carried Mason on his shoulders and cheered him on at school events, now committed the unthinkable. Hours later, the storm outside had subsided, but inside the house, a far darker storm had left its mark. The once cozy home was now a scene of unimaginable horror. Blood stained the walls and floor, a haunting testament to the violence that had unfolded. Ryan sat in the living room, his hands trembling as he stared at the aftermath of his actions. The haze of drugs and rage had lifted, replaced by a crushing clarity. The realization of what he had done hit him like a freight train. He saw Emily's lifeless body, her once vivid eyes now staring blankly. He saw Mason's small frame, so still, so silent. The weight of his actions was unbearable. Ryan stumbled to the kitchen, his mind racing. He couldn't face the consequences, not the media frenzy, not the police, not the judgment of the world that had once adored him. But more than anything, he couldn't face himself. In the drawer, he found the weapon he would use to end it all. As he held it in his hands, tears streamed down his face. He whispered apologies to Emily and Mason, his voice breaking with every word. "I'm so sorry," he choked out. "I didn't mean for this to happen. I love you. I love you both." With a final act of despair, Ryan ended his own life, leaving behind a blood-stained legacy that would haunt the world forever. The Titan, once a hero to millions, had fallen in the most devastating way. A man who seemed to have it all, fame, fortune, and a loving family, was consumed by the demons he couldn't escape. The world would remember Ryan Steele, but not for his triumphs in the ring. Instead, his name would forever be tied to a night of unspeakable horror, a chilling reminder of the fragility of the human mind and the devastating consequences of unhealed wounds. When the news broke, it sent shockwaves through the wrestling world and beyond. Headlines blared with phrases like "The Titans Fall" and "From Hero to Monster." Fans who had once cheered for Ryan Steele in sold-out arenas were now left grappling with the horrifying reality of his actions. Television networks aired hour-long specials dissecting every detail of the tragedy. Social media exploded with reactions, some expressing disbelief, others anger, and many mourning the loss of Emily and Mason. Fan forums were flooded with posts, ranging from heartfelt tributes to furious condemnations. "How could someone who inspired so many do something so heinous?" one fan tweeted. Late-night talk show hosts, news anchors, and sports analysts all weighed in, turning the tragedy into a spectacle. Paparazzi camped outside Ryan's childhood home and his former Wrestling Federation's headquarters, hungry for any new angle. The media frenzy reached a fever pitch when previously unseen footage of Ryan's final matches and interviews began circulating, showing glimpses of the inner turmoil he had tried so hard to hide. As investigators pieced together the events leading up to that fateful night, a troubling picture emerged. Reports revealed that Ryan had been battling addiction for years. The chronic pain from years of wrestling injuries had led him to rely on painkillers, which eventually spiraled into substance abuse. Coupled with performance-enhancing drugs, his body and mind were pushed to their breaking point. Mental health experts weighed in, pointing out that Ryan had exhibited classic signs of untreated trauma and depression. His abusive childhood, the relentless pressure of fame, and the toxic culture of professional wrestling had created a perfect storm. The industry, which prized physical endurance and larger-than-life personas, left. Former colleagues came forward with stories of their own struggles, painting a damning picture of an environment where injuries were ignored, mental health was stigmatized, and athletes were expected to push through pain at all costs. "He was crying out for help, but no one was listening," said one anonymous source. The tragedy ignited a firestorm of debates across the nation. Conversations about mental health, addiction, and the cost of fame dominated talk shows, podcasts, and social media platforms. "This isn't just about Ryan," one mental health advocate said during a televised panel. "This is about an entire system that chews people up and spits them out. We need to do better for everyone." Others were less forgiving, arguing that no amount of pain or pressure could justify his actions. Vigils were held for Emily and Mason, with mourners demanding justice and accountability. "Emily and Mason didn't deserve this," one mourner said, holding a candle outside their family home. "They were innocent. Ryan's pain doesn't excuse what he did." The Wrestling Federation faced intense scrutiny, with critics calling for reforms to address the physical and mental toll on athletes. Former wrestlers shared harrowing stories of their own struggles, adding fuel to the growing movement for change. The tragedy of Ryan Steele wasn't just the fall of a beloved hero. It was a mirror held up to a society that glorifies strength while ignoring vulnerability. As the nation mourned, it also began to ask difficult questions. How many more lives must be lost before we prioritize mental health? How can we ensure that those who inspire us are given the care they need to survive the pressures of their own success. After Ryan Steele's tragic story left ripples that extended far beyond the wrestling world, as the shock subsided, a collective reckoning began. Ryan's younger sister, Jessica Steele, who had always admired her brother's strength, emerged as a leading voice in the conversation about mental health in sports. Devastated by the loss of her family, she channeled her grief into action. Partnering with mental health professionals and former athletes, she launched the Steele Foundation for Mental Wellness in Sports, an organization dedicated to providing resources, counseling, and advocacy for athletes at all levels. In her first public appearance after the tragedy, Jessica addressed a packed press conference, her voice steady but emotional. "My brother was more than his mistakes. He was a man who carried the weight of the world on his shoulders and never felt like he could ask for help. I refuse to let his story end in silence. We need to do better. For the Ryans out there who are struggling, unseen and unheard." The foundation quickly gained traction, with endorsements from major sports organizations, celebrities, and even some of Ryan's former colleagues. Former wrestlers and insiders began to speak out, sharing their own experiences with the industry's grueling demands. One retired wrestler recounted, "We were taught to fight through pain, to never show weakness. But that mindset breaks people. It broke Ryan." The Wrestling Federation, under mounting public pressure, announced a series of reforms, including mandatory mental health screenings, substance abuse programs, and a hotline for athletes to seek help confidentially. These changes, while significant, were seen by many as too little, too late for Ryan, Emily, and Mason. Ryan Steele's story became a haunting reminder of the dangerous intersection of fame, unaddressed trauma, and societal stigma around mental health. Here was a man who had inspired millions with his strength, resilience, and charisma, yet behind the public persona was someone deeply wounded, battling demons no one could see. His fall from grace was not just a personal tragedy, but a reflection of systemic failures. The industry that celebrated his triumphs turned a blind eye to his struggles, and the culture that idolized him offered no space for vulnerability. The public grappled with uncomfortable questions. Could Ryan's actions have been prevented if he had received the help he needed? How many others were silently battling the same pressures, afraid to speak out for fear of judgment or ridicule? Ryan Steele's story forces us to confront some difficult truths. Could this tragedy have been prevented if Ryan had sought help earlier? What can we do as a society to better support those who are struggling in silence? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We want to hear from you. If this story moved you, please like this video and subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden struggles behind the headlines. Let's keep this important conversation going. Mental health matters, and together we can make a difference. Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. You never know who might need to hear your words today. The legacy of Ryan Steele is a cautionary tale, but it's also a call to action. It reminds us that even the strongest among us can falter, and that true strength lies in acknowledging our struggles and seeking help. Let his story inspire change, not just in the wrestling world, but in how we view and support mental health everywhere.